Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about my Week 8 must-starter sits for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about players that you may have picked up just this past week in waiver wires, additions that perhaps had big weeks in Week 7, and you are contemplating whether or not you should play them in Week 8. I've heard many questions on these said players, so I wanted to go ahead and give you my thought process and address 8 different players, 4 at the running back, 4 at the wide receiver position, to kind of give you guys my thought process going into Week 8. Before we get into that, let me remind all of you, if you haven't yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community, click the bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. Also lets you know when I'm live during my live streams. Don't forget, tomorrow, Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, I will be doing my live stream as well. Updated rankings will be there like we typically do every Sunday. Also, do not forget, if you haven't yet already, please click that like button on today's video. Very much so appreciate it. Hey guys, how's it going? All right, hope everyone's doing well. Like I was saying, we're going to be talking about some must-start running backs. We're going to be talking about running backs that I believe should be talked about, because I heard many questions. I mean, listen, I go through the comment section. Yes, I don't have time to answer every single person's question, but I go and I look at everything, and I saw a lot of questions regarding Chase Edmonds or Ty Johnson or Jamaal Williams for this week at the running back position. And I thought there were pretty vital conversations to potentially be had with said running back. So I wanted to go ahead and take some time out of the week, instead of doing a hidden gems and hoping that somebody had a monster week. I want to talk about guys that are in many of your rosters and could potentially be, big contributors for your team going forward, especially considering the injuries and all of this kind of jazz. That's why Chase Edmonds is playing. That's why Ty Johnson's playing, to kind of give you guys my perspective on the case. So let's start off. Let's talk about the running back position, and then we'll talk about wide receivers next. But to begin, it's Chase Edmonds, a guy that is coming off of a monster week, 3 rushing touchdowns, 27 rushing yards, over 100 rushing yards on the ground, is filling in for David Johnson. The question is, do I play Chase Edmonds? Is it a trap to play him this coming week after that monster week? Because I know many of us have had it in the past where we'll pick up someone off the waivers that had a monster week, we'll play him the following week, and they're garbage. That always happens in fantasy, but I kind of want to give you guys my thought process and why I think Chase Edmonds can be a good play in a PPR or half PPR format going into this week. Now, as we all know, David Johnson dealing with a back ankle injury. Whether, which one is more relevant as of right, whether it's the back injury or the ankle injury, it doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is that he's out. This team has signed other running backs like Alfred Morris and Zach Sanders, so they're anticipating perhaps a longer resting point for David Johnson in order to keep him healthy for the rest of the season. Now, what is Chase Edmonds going to go against? He's playing against the Saints defense that are the 4th best against opposing running backs thus far this season, only averaging and giving up only 69.1 rushing yards per game to opposing running backs, which is not a lot. This team is clamped up, and I always say it every week, they are very good against the run, and as a defense, they've been playing better over the last couple of weeks as a whole entity. They also give up the 6th most points to opposing wide receivers, which is mainly where they've struggled. Their secondary at times has been their weakest point. But up front, they have been a pretty stout unit of a front 7 that has been able to stop opposing running backs on a weekly basis and not really allow many people to do anything against them. So here's the conversation that we're going to have, right? We're thinking, can Kyler Murray, this offense, Chase Edmonds with this offensive line, are they capable of being able to run the ball against the Saints? Now, when we look at this offensive line, not a single one of these offensive linemen have surpassed, as of thus far this season, through the first 7 weeks of the season, not a single one of these offensive linemen have surpassed a 55.5 grade on Pro Football Focus. That's pretty ridiculous considering it's a grade out of 100, right? So when they grade these players and not a single one of these offensive linemen we're not able to surpass the 55.5 rating mark in run blocking. Excuse me. Let me preface it. In run blocking, in pass blocking, and other categories, they've been better. But in run blocking, they have not been great thus far this season. Even though this past week they were able to really open up some lanes for Chase Edmonds, that was 1 week. And when you play against a tougher defense like the New Orleans Saints, it is going to be more difficult. Now, here's the conversation that we need to have. Chase Edmonds is not only I need to run the ball and get 3 rushing touchdowns to have value kind of running back. He is a versatile running back that is going to be used like David Johnson. He's going to be used in the running game. He's going to be used in the passing game. They're going to use him all around the field in multiple situations, formations, and honestly, I think as it sits right now with the Cardinals offense and how bad the Saints have been against opposing wide receivers, I think there's a specific place and a niche in which Chase Edmonds is going to find value, and this is what I want to talk about. So as of right now, the Arizona Cardinals have led the National Football League in running 10 personnel. Now, what does that mean? That means 1 running back, 0 tight ends, right? Typically, the Arizona Cardinals love to run 4 wide receiver sets. In fact, as of thus far this season, they've run the most 4 wide receiver sets amongst all NFL teams. You can just go look at snap counts in terms like that. They really do love running 4 wide receiver sets, 3 wide receiver sets. But they've also ran the most times out of 4 wide receiver sets. They've ran rushing attempts for the running back position. They've ran the most out of 4 wide receiver sets with 44 attempts. Now, to take into account just how many that is, the entire other 31 teams in the National Football League in 10 personnel with 4 wide receiver sets have only ran the ball 29 total times out of that specific formation. And the Arizona Cardinals have done it 44. The entire rest of the league 29 times. So what exactly kind of advantage does this give the Arizona Cardinals? Well, it makes it so where defenses have to respect the amount of wide receivers you have on the field. You have to take linebackers out of the formations. You have to take defensive linemen out of the formations. Bring in extra cornerbacks to cover. And what does that do? That allows David Johnson and Chase Edmonds to not have to really worry about the lack of talent they have up front and they can just really run freely. And that's what they've done. David Johnson thus far this season has only faced 8+ defenders in the box 6.49% of the time, according to Next Gen Stats. Also, Chase Edmonds thus far this season has only faced 8+ defenders in the box 1.96% of the time. That is unbelievable. He is the league, comparatively to all eligible running backs thus far this season, he has faced 8+ defenders less than anybody in the National Football League thus far, which is absolutely ridiculous, which gives him an inherent value and an advantage against defensive fronts. Because when you're in 4 wide, all you got to do is run a zone option or something of that nature, and it's going to give Chase Edmonds a little bit of a better opportunity than it would have whether you were running, double tight end or put a fullback in the backfield and try to run it that way. It's not really going to work that way. That's not how this offense is built. Now, as of right now, about 64.4% of Arizona's runs are against boxes fewer than 6+ defenders, right? So not only are they not playing against 8+ defenders in the box, but almost 65% of the time, they're going against boxes with 6 or fewer defenders, which, if you guys don't know, defenders in the box from tackle to tackle, how many people from linebackers, defensive linemen are counted in that area. So as of right now, let's see. The crazy thing about that is that they also lead the league by almost 10% in that specific statistic. Now, where do I see Chase Edmonds having value? Now, because I'm throwing numbers at you, the real issue with the matter is whether or not you should start Chase Edmonds. Let's get past all this BS. Chase Edmonds has inherent value as a receiving back, and I think that's where he's going to majority find his value. There is no place else where he's going to have value. If you play in a standard league, I have a harder time starting Chase Edmonds. Sure, he has scored a touchdown in each of the last 3 weeks. That is beautiful. That's exactly what we want to see. But as of right now, it hurts me to think that in a standard league, if he is not catching the ball as many times as he potentially can, he's not going to be giving you enough value to potentially be a start. So if you are playing in a full PPR and a half PPR, let's go ahead and let's look at these stats so that we're all on the same page, just so that everyone can check this out. So as of late, what has the Saints done to opposing running backs? They really have not allowed a single opposing running back to rush over 100 yards. But the stat that I continue to see is allowing the amount of receptions they have. Look at the last couple of weeks. Tariq Cohen caught the ball 9 times. Leonard Fournette the week before that, 6. It does not show, but Derek Gumbawale for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers caught the ball twice too. So total, 6 receptions for that team. Ezekiel Elliott, 6 catches. CJ Prosise plus Chris Carson, that's 6 catches out of that backfield. As of late, a lot of running backs have been able to utilize the fact that they can catch the ball out of the backfield to play against this Saints defense that is not going to give you much value during the running game, right? So if in fact we can see Chase Edmonds getting a bunch of targets and receptions, then he can have value. Now you're asking me, Well, is he not going to have a lot of targets and reception? Of course he is. Let's go look at David Johnson's stats. Thus far this season, through the first 6 weeks of the season, as you can tell, David Johnson accumulated 41 targets and 30 receptions. Just look at his yardage counts, especially during the receiving game. 55, 28, 99, 65, 68. This guy has been extremely utilized as a top wide receiver of this team. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, this guy's... let me go and check that, actually. Is he not the leading receiver for this team? I could have swore that he was. Let me check this out. No, I don't want the St. Louis Cardinals. Goodness gracious. Come on, give me the Arizona Cardinals. Thank you. Who's the leading receiver of this team? Yep. David Johnson is the number 2 wide receiver or receiving target on this team thus far. So if we look at these numbers and we see the amount of targets he was getting, 7, 9, 11, 5, 8, the amount of targets that DJ has gotten thus far this season has really boosted his value. And that's exactly what Chase Edmonds is walking into. And I think in a PPR format, half PPR format, Chase Edmonds will have the value. And that's why I'm thinking he has to be started this week. There's no way that you can leave him on your bench, even though it could be a bait. I really have a hard time leaving Chase Edmonds on the bench this week as an option that, coming off of the last couple of weeks, has been on fire, is inheriting a backfield that has a lot of value in terms of the receiving game against a team that, if they want to, they can throw the ball against the Saints for a good amount of time. Obviously, Kyler's going to be pressured in the pocket, but it gives Edmonds a lot of value. Also, really quickly, last season, David Johnson in 2018 only saw, I think it was, he caught was it targets or was it receptions? I have the stat right here. Here we go. So DJ last season was targeted 10 times in the slot position in 2018. Just already thus far this season, in the first 6 games of his seasons, he's already surpassed that. So not only are they going to line up Chase Edmonds as a wide receiver in the slot position, but they're going to use him out of the backfield. They're going to use 5 wide sets, which they have thus far this season, a couple of times on occasion. I do believe Edmonds has value. That's why I wanted to mention him, so that everyone is on the same page as me. So hopefully that helps you out. All right, let's go ahead and talk about a couple other guys. Let's talk about Ty Johnson. I'm not going to be talking about these guys for a lengthy amount of time, 10 minutes. I really wanted to focus on Edmonds because I do believe many of us have that fringe option of whether or not we should be playing him. So I wanted to kind of establish that so that we're on the same page. All right, let's go ahead and talk about number 2, Ty Johnson. All right, Ty Johnson's filling in for Kerryon Johnson. Kerryon Johnson had a knee injury, has been placed on the IR. The earliest he can show up is week 16 in fantasy, so that pretty much makes him irrelevant unless you are playing in a championship game, and even then they are probably not bringing him back in week 16. So his season is pretty much done. Now, where does that leave Ty Johnson? As many of us know, Ty Johnson will be splitting the backfield with J.D. McKissic, a longtime Seahawks running back, who's pretty much the Theo Riddick of this team this year, if that makes sense for those of you who are familiar with fantasy football and the Lions backfield. So as of right now, where does Ty Johnson lie going into this matchup? Because it is an extremely favorable matchup. You get to play against the Giants, and we all saw what Chase Edmonds was able to do against them last week. Again, 3 touchdowns, 27 rushing yards, over 100 rushing yards total, 27 rushing attempts, and where does Ty Johnson kind of place himself in here? So the Giants are giving up the 5th most points to opposing running backs in half PPR scoring formats this season. And I was looking at it, and I kind of wanted to get a sense of just how many times teams are running the ball against the Giants thus far this season. Rushing attempts against the Giants, starting from week 1 to as of late. But just looking at their rushing attempts, I'm just going to read a couple numbers here. 25, 26, 27, 15, 31, 27, 28. Those are the amount of times teams have ran the ball with running backs only against the Giants defense. Often it's because of the fact that teams are getting ahead and they're just running the clock out in the second half. And I do believe Ty Johnson is going to be that, and I think that this is going to be a one-sided matchup in which Ty Johnson and the Lions are going to have the lead, and in the second half are going to be forced to run the ball and kill time and be able to produce. Yes, last week, in the absence of Kerryon Johnson getting hurt early in that game, Ty Johnson came in, had 14 touches, 4 receptions in those 14 touches, only 57 total yards. Sure, that's not great, but the Minnesota Vikings defense is no joke, right? We shouldn't hold that too much against Ty Johnson and more against the Detroit Lions' capabilities of an offense running the ball. But when you go into a matchup against the New York Giants, I really do believe this is going to be a one-sided affair. I know many of you guys were thinking, And I saw comments from this past week when I did my rankings on Ty Johnson. You were wondering, why do you have Ty Johnson ahead of like a guy like Devontae Freeman? Well, now that Matt Ryan's gone, that even solidifies it more, in my opinion, because there are going to be less options. And a lot of these other guys in the National Football League aren't going to be playing against the Giants. Really, the Giants are terrible, guys. They cannot stop a soul. And I do think Ty Johnson this week, a very valuable option. There's a reason why you picked him up. It's so you can play him because you are in need of a running back. And if you're not in need of a running back, perhaps you just hold him, stash him, or maybe you even trade him because he's going to have value going forward. All right, let's go and move on. Let's talk about number 3, Jamaal Williams, running back for the Packers. Now, we all know Aaron Jones is going to have a good week. Aaron Jones is pretty much the number 1 of this team. And we've seen Aaron Jones have monster week, sure, against the Lions a couple Monday nights ago. Wasn't fantastic, but that's not a big deal. So what exactly does Jamaal Williams have in store? For those of you who were able to pick him up a couple weeks ago or just recently in your respective leagues, the thing about Jamaal Williams is that the split between him and Aaron Jones is relatively close. As of right now, I would guess to say it's probably about a 60-40 split in total offensive snaps. So Aaron Jones is not running the ball, but in the game 60% of the time, while Jamal Adams is in the game 40% of the time. Now, obviously, it varies comparatively to what they need in said game. If they need more pass protection, they'll bring in Jamaal Williams. If they need more, heavy running up the middle, we've often seen Aaron Jones be used as that, RB1 of the team. But going into this matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs without Patrick Mahomes will be down a pretty significant part of their offense. Patrick Mahomes is their offense. Sure, Matt Moore was able to come in last week against the Denver Broncos and produce. That's perfectly fine, but I do not believe Matt Moore is going to be able to, produce at will against this defense. He is not one of those elite quarterbacks that can come in and produce. Sure, the offense that surrounds him is great. You're getting your offensive line back. You're getting left tackle Fisher back. The left guard's coming back. That's perfectly fine. That is going to help you, but it's not going to make a big difference. I believe the Green Bay Packers are going to be leading this game, and they're going to be keying in heavily on the running game. Just going back from week 1 on, the amount of times the Chiefs have been ran on, 14, 17, 33, 38, 31, 21. The amount of times opposing teams are running the ball heavily on the Kansas City Chiefs is not by accident. It is because this team is not good against the run. In the last 5 weeks, obviously this past week against the Denver Broncos, the Denver Broncos were not able to produce very well on the ground, even though Royce Freeman ended up scoring a touchdown. But in the last 5 weeks, or the 4 weeks prior to that, they allowed a 100-yard rusher in every single one of those games. So in the 4 out of the last 5 weeks, they've allowed a 100-yard rusher. And I do believe, yes, there is a combination between Aaron Jones and Jamaal Williams in which we're going to find value. And that's why I think Jamaal Williams is a guy that's kind of sneaking around, sitting on a lot of benches that could have flex value this week, especially considering his usage in the passing game. 5 targets, 4 receptions last couple weeks. The guy has been pretty good there. And he's going to continue to be good, especially in this matchup. That's why I wanted to mention him. All right. Moving on, let's talk about Jaylen Samuels. Now, many of you might not know, but Jaylen Samuels participated this past week and is full go tomorrow. So, what does that mean exactly? Benny Snell was a guy that I mentioned this past week, talking about guys that you could potentially pick up and play because they're playing against the Miami Dolphins. Jaylen Samuels is the backup running back behind James Conner in the Steelers offense. So what exactly kind of value does he have? Well, what we've seen prior to him going under the knife and getting the knee scope and kind of restructuring that, obviously he's done his 2 weeks. He's good. He's healthy, ready to go. Jaylen Samuels was used a lot in the running game, used a lot in the passing game, and was the wildcat quarterback for this team. And we've seen him, even in the past. Jaylen Samuels passed the ball 3 times in a singular game. We even saw this dude throw an interception. They're using this guy a lot because the offense isn't really established with this quarterback, Mason Rudolph. They need to throw in more opportunities for the running game to work successfully, and that's what they've done. So going forward, what do I see against Jaylen Samuels versus the Miami Dolphins? As we all know, the Miami Dolphins give up the second most points to opposing running backs thus far this season. As of late, the Miami Dolphins have been better. They didn't allow a touchdown to the Washington Redskins, perfectly fine, and they actually played pretty well against the Bills last week. Singletary and the combination of Frank Gore weren't really able to get anything moving on the ground, even though Frank Gore was pretty much averaging almost 5 yards per carry. But game script wise, weren't able to really key in on that or produce much going forward. But what I've seen in the last couple weeks with the Pittsburgh Steelers offense, now that they've been really trying to get into structuring an offense that they can run with the rest of the year, key word, run with, because they want to run the ball so heavily. In the last 3 games, even with Mason Rudolph going down with that injury, the team has ran the ball 81 times and passed the ball 80 times in the last 3 games. Nearly 50-50 split between running and passing, which you don't see often in the National Football League anymore. If you go look at teams like the Falcons, they pass the ball nearly 70% of the time. There are teams out there that pass the ball at an extremely high rate because of the fact that they can't move on the ground. And they're often having to come back in games because their defense isn't good. But because of the fact that you're playing against the Miami Dolphins, and you have the Pittsburgh Steelers defense playing against Ryan Fitzmagic, who could end up throwing up 4 picks. It's always a possibility. I do believe Jaylen Samuels, this offensive line, who is, goodness gracious, they have a fantastic offensive line. Villanueva, Foster, Pouncey, DeCastro, they have a solid offensive line. You have a good running back scheme. You have Connor, you have Samuels. Both of them are going to be great. Just wanted to mention him as a potential pickup because I know many people thought he wasn't coming back for a while, but he's ready to go this week. All right, guys. So, really quickly, before we move on to wide receivers, let me go ahead and click a couple things here. All right, cool. So, let's do that, shall we? All right, so, talking about my must-start wide receivers. Now, here's the thing. These are guys that potentially, and I'm anticipating they were picked up in waivers. Now, in a regular 12-team league with like 7 bench spots, Marvin Jones was already rostered. But these other guys, not so much. Well, if you were in my league, I probably had Jamison Crowder on roster, or he was somewhere already picked up. That being said, the thing is, I do believe all these wide receivers, Marvin Jones, Corey Davis, Kenny Stills, and Jamison Crowder, all have immense value this week. And I think kind of giving you my thoughts on it, just so that everyone's aware, is a pretty good stance, just to kind of, I don't know. Let's get this over with. Okay, let's talk about these wide receivers. I don't know anymore. All right, so let's talk about Marvin Jones. Obviously, he's coming off of a game in which he had 13 targets, 10 receptions, 93 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns. That does not happen very often. But Xavier Rhodes obviously can't do anything. He was having trouble with McLaurin. If Case Keenum didn't go out of that game, McLaurin was going to have a monster game, regardless. Playing against the New York Giants, like I mentioned earlier with Ty Johnson, is one of the easiest things you can do in the National Football League. The Giants thus far this season are, they're one of the worst in the passing game as well in terms of stopping the pass. They're in that bottom tier of secondaries where they're giving up top 10 stats to receptions, to receiving yards, receiving touchdowns, to opposing wide receivers in the National Football League, which is not good at all. The Giants are giving up, if I'm not mistaken, I think they're giving up like the 4th most points to opposing wide receivers thus far this season. Let me actually confirm this. But even then, as of late, it's pretty actually ridiculous. I want to actually find this stat so we can confirm this. So as of thus far this season, they're giving up the 8th most points to opposing wide receivers in fantasy half PPR. Thus far this season, they've given up, 100 receiving yards to 5 different receivers in only 7 games. And if we go ahead and we subtract last game, because Chase Edmonds just ran the ball for the entire clock, really they've given up 6 100-yard wide receivers in 6 games, which, to be honest, kind of opens up a little bit of opportunity here for either Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay. Now, here's the question. Which one of the two is going to be the play? Is it going to be a every other week kind of thing, or is Marvin Jones, after this big performance, going to be more relied upon as a piece of this offense going forward? Now, we know Marvin Jones is a good wide receiver. We've seen him in years past, especially in 2017, where he had over 1,100 receiving yards, over 10-plus touchdowns. We've seen him be a valuable part of this offense, and we've seen him, just as of late, he has led all wide receivers in the Detroit Lions offense with snap shares. He's leading all of them. So going forward in this matchup, I do believe the fact that the Giants cannot stop anybody, and they are giving up so many points to opposing wide receivers, not to mention Javoris Jenkins, these cornerbacks, they cannot cover, especially past 10-plus yards targets. These guys are going to struggle in the secondary, and when you have 2 big-body receiving targets like Kenny Galladay on one side of the field, Marvin Jones. It's going to be tough to even cover them, much less be able to stop the running game, worry about them, and be able to lock everything down. I think a guy like Marvin Jones could be a bait. He had 38 points this past week. Are we expecting him to have 16? No. I'm expecting Marvin Jones to be a wide receiver 3 fringe upside wide receiver 2 candidate. I'm not expecting him to come and all of a sudden be a top 10 guy. We have to really settle down our expectations with guys like these, because that's not what they are. These guys are guys that will have big weeks, and especially going into great matchups as such, I have a hard time leaving him on my bench. So really, I'm playing Marvin Jones this week, any opportunity I have the chance to do so. All right, moving on. Let's talk about Corey Davis. All right, so Corey Davis last week saw the most targets that he's seen all season long. Corey Davis is a guy that had over 100 targets last year and really was throwing the ball too heavily. But this year really is falling out of favor in this offense. Obviously, because of the fact that Marcus Mariota has heavily struggled, does not want to throw in the tight windows. At least last week, with the switch of quarterback, Ryan Tannehill came in and revitalized this offense, like I mentioned earlier this week. And I do believe Corey Davis, going forward, should have more value. And he's a guy that had a good week last week because of the amount of targets he saw, the amount of usage he saw, and the depth of target. This is a guy that is going downfield 10, 15 plus yards down the field and making receptions and making plays. Bigger statured guy that should be valuable. Now, what is so valuable is that you play against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a team that gives up the second most points to opposing wide receivers, and my God, is that valuable. Thus far this season, with only 6 games played, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are still among the worst teams in the National Football League, giving up 90 receptions thus far to opposing wide receivers, 1,222 receiving yards, 23 receiving yards to opposing wide receivers, and 7 receiving touchdowns. I'm telling you, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers cannot cover anybody. Sure, they're great against stopping the run. Thus far this season, their front 7 has been pretty good. They have really rendered many running backs worthless, except for Christian McCaffrey, because Christian McCaffrey had a mission, and he accomplished that mission in London. Derrick Henry could struggle. That's not my concern right now. My concern is Corey Davis and this receiving core, and I think a guy like this, who is the number 1 of his team, who is leading this team with snap counts at the wide receiver position, who is or was drafted to be the number 1, is going to see more targets. And once those targets continue to flood in with accurate passing, finally, from a guy like Ryan Tannehill, which is kind of surprising considering this guy usually only targets the slot, especially that's what he did in Miami. Going forward, I think Corey Davis, especially this week in the matchup, a guy that I really do want to play, and I feel pretty confident in his participation this week. All right, moving on. Let's talk about Kenny Stills. All right, so here's the thing about the Raiders' defense. The Raiders are not good. Defensively, secondary, they give up a lot of points. That's not a secret. We saw Aaron Rodgers completely destroy this defense, and really anybody who's surprised with that shouldn't be. They've struggled heavily in terms of injuries. Their secondary has been beat up. That is not a surprise. Thus far this season, the Oakland Raiders have given up the 4th most points to opposing wide receivers. And not only that, they traded away a corner this week to the Houston Texans, the team that they're playing. Yeah, they traded away a corner. So not only were they already thin at the secondary position, but they went ahead and they traded away a corner. So who is their top 2 corners? We still have Darryl Worley and we still have Mullins. Darryl Worley's probably going to have to step up and be the number 1 cornerback. But then you got Mullen. And Mullen has to take on Kenny Stills. Kenny Stills is a speedster. Even without Will Fuller there, Kenny Stills pretty much fills in that number 2 wide receiver spot as a guy that, even from what we saw last week, what we've seen all season long, going back to week 1, he is a deep ball receiver, and he's going to use his speed as an advantage to take off the top of the defense and score. And that's exactly what complements DeAndre Hopkins on the other side of the field. When you have a deep threat, always taking the top off the defense, you cannot double cover DeAndre Hopkins that much. Now, that being said, Kenny Stills going forward in this matchup should be fine. Why? The Raiders thus far this season have given up 20 receptions of 20 plus yards and 6 receptions of 40 plus yards, which is not great. This team is going to be battered and bruised in terms of deep ball receptions, and a guy like Kenny Stills coming into this matchup, I mean, it's it's juicy. The Raiders thus far are allowing the most passing yards from deep ball receptions, 148 receiving yards per game in that specific statistic. That was a tongue twister there. But either way, I do think Kenny Stills in this matchup should be a good play. And I think he's a guy that you should be able to rely upon as a wide receiver 3. All right, moving on to the last guy I wanted to mention on today's video, Jamison Crowder. Jamison Crowder's playing the slot position. We've heard all this noise this past week about Robbie Anderson potentially being traded. And I even mentioned it before, like I mentioned Robbie Anderson's rumors before it ever got reported anywhere. I don't know where I got it from, but I heard it somewhere. So somebody's got the inside loop on what teams are looking for. But Robbie Anderson, whether he gets traded to the Eagles or the Raiders or somebody else that is in need of a wide receiver, I still do believe Jamison Crowder is a guy that in a PPR format is going to have a lot of value, and especially this week moving forward. The Jacksonville Jaguars are not the same defense without Jalen Ramsey. That is not a surprise. In terms of their secondary, sure, they were able to force a lot of turnovers by Andy Dalton last week, but the guy still came back and still threw the ball a lot. Alex Erickson, Tyler Boyd, last week each had 14 targets. Alex Erickson wasn't primarily used in the slot position, but neither was Tyler Boyd. Both of these guys are both slot receivers. Both had 14 targets. Alex Erickson had a huge game of over 100 receiving yards. Sure, Tyler Boyd only 5 receptions, fumbled, struggled. But I do believe targeting the slot wide receiver position for this team is going to be an essential way to getting down the field and or scoring. We've seen that without a doubt in my mind, Sam Darnold needs to be able to warm up. He plays in a way where you have to complete short passes in order to get him going into a rhythm. If you cannot get Sam Darnold into a rhythm, he's going to throw back-to-back interceptions. He's capable of doing that. He's not experienced enough, and he's not good enough as of right now to be able to adjust to that or take a sack or not throw a ball away. That is not what he is capable of doing. And I think Jamison Crowder is the key to this offense going forward. And I do believe this week he is going to be having a more involved game. Even though he had a decent amount of targets, 5 last week, 4 receptions, only 20 some odd yards. The week before that, 9 targets. And then prior to that, obviously week 1, I always go back to it, 17 targets. That's a huge number that is not by accident. They're going to target the slot receiver. They're going to be better this week because you can't get embarrassed like that on primetime television and not come back better. And I expect Jamison Crowder to be a focal point on this offense. So, thank you everybody for watching. I appreciate you guys spending your time today watching this video. If you haven't yet already, click that subscribe button. Click the like button on today's video. Join the community. Tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Join us for the live stream that I will be hosting here on YouTube. Thank you again, guys. And until tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Peace.